So let me just begin by welcoming everybody. This is me in a car, you can probably tell, outside of a Starbucks in San Diego, where I didn't expect to be here, but my daughter just moved from one house to another. I'm Lynne Twist, in case I didn't say that, from Pachamama Alliance, and she doesn't have internet. So I came to Starbucks, but of course they don't let you be inside, and if I did, I'd have to have a mask and etc. So I'm in the car. But I can see all of you and hopefully you can hear me, and we're going to do it this way. So we have several hundred people, many hundreds of people signed up. So I know that you'll be joining us when you do, those of you who aren't here yet, and those of you who are here, welcome. And we probably have quite a few people after the hour since we haven't usually started at quarter of. But let me just acknowledge that you are here, and thank you so much for coming. This is also streaming on Facebook, and this is the Resilience and Possibility series, which is the purpose of which is to really create an environment, a space of making sense of what's going on in the world today and how we're faring, how we're navigating, how we're bringing resilience and possibility to whatever is occurring, whether it has to do with the election or COVID or climate change or the fires in California, or wherever and whatever you happen to be facing or going through or embracing. These webinars are designed to empower you, to uplift you, to deepen your resilience, to open you to the possibility of life. And whatever it is we're going through as a human community, it's some sort of a birth canal. There is a baby on the other end. That's my way of looking at this. So once again, I'm Lynne Twist from Pachamama Alliance, and we begin all of our webinars, seminars with a little sacred space, and especially today because we're just following Indigenous Peoples Day, which was yesterday, and our two guests are very related to Indigenous peoples' work, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But they both had awesome ceremonies yesterday, and I hope you did too, realizing the depth and love and devotion and dedication we all have for the Indigenous people who inhabited these lands well before most of us. And so if you feel comfortable doing so, please lower your eyes or close them while we open sacred space. And as you drop into the sweet territory of the breath, notice the equanimity of give and take, reciprocity of give and take. One of the great tenets of Indigenous people, reciprocity, giving and taking in equal measure. Something the modern world has lost sight of and needs to revisit, reimagine, recreate. And as you give and take with your breath, receive and let go, arrive here fully, here in this community of Pacha people, committed with all our hearts and souls, with our finances, with our time, with our energies, to bring forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. May all the distractions of the modern world, which are relaxed a little bit due to COVID, tone down even more so that we can fully be here, now, present, in deep appreciation of the profound blessing of life. And as you breathe in and out, know that you breathe with and in communion with the community of life, all other human beings, all other animals and species, and all plants, all living things, including Gaia, the Great Mother, the living earth. And as you breathe, breathe in her love and breathe out your deep appreciation and gratitude for her many, many, many gifts. Breathe in the love of the Creator and breathe out respect, dignity, honor, and love. And now let's take a deep breath together. And breathe out with a sigh. Ah, and open your eyes and smile at that little green dot on your screen. Okay, thank you so much. So the purpose of this call and of all calls are to share with you remarkable people who understand the Pachamama Alliance, our mission, and who we are, and are doing work that's related, that is powerful, that is worthy of our attention and intention, and to glean from remarkable people, remarkable leaders like the two we have today, a way to deepen our own resilience and possibility in these difficult times. So here we are in October, almost the middle of October. Many of you who are involved in Pachamama Alliance know that on November 19th, we'll be gathering virtually, hopefully the largest virtual gathering we've ever had. So I just want to say that now. So if you're not aware of that, our Pachamama Alliance Global Community Gathering will be on November 19th from noon to 1:15 Pacific time. And we invite all of you to be a host of a community group that you bring together as you would if you were attending an event, like having a table host. And you can find out about that on our Pachamama Alliance website. So just a little nudge to put you in that space as we move towards November 19th. So let's go on to today. We have some awesome people, and I want to introduce them to you. And I'm very, very excited because one of them I've known for many, many years, and the other person I've known only briefly, and really am discovering him and want you to discover him as well. Our first guest that I'll speak about is Edgar Villanueva. Edgar Villanueva. And he is a nationally recognized expert on social justice philanthropy. Edgar currently serves as chair of the board of directors of Native Americans in Philanthropy and is a board member of the Andrus Family Fund, a national foundation that works to improve outcomes for vulnerable youth. But Edgar has an incredible history, and I'm going to ask him to tell you about it. But I really, I've heard him speak, but I really discovered him when I read his book, Decolonizing Wealth, which I highly recommend. And his book is just shaking the philanthropic community, shaking us to our roots, to really look at how colonized we still are and how colonizing we still are, and how to decolonize ourselves is a huge, huge undertaking. It has to do, of course, with racism. It has to do, of course, with domination. It has to do, of course, with patriarchy. There's a lot of dimensions. But one way of talking about all of it could be decolonizing. And decolonizing wealth in particular is his specialty, his area of interest, his expertise, and he's been doing it for years and years and years, and he's a young man. And our other guest is Hilary Giovalli. And Hilary Giovalli has been a Pacha person for many, many, many years. She went to the rainforest with us long ago and became very involved in Pachamama Alliance. She and her husband, Pete, her children, actually, their whole family is involved in Pachamama Alliance. And they have a foundation that Hilary's been a very active player in for many years. And so she's really basically calls herself a community organizer. She's a philanthropist. She's the author of a forthcoming ethno-autobiography about her process of decolonizing and healing from whiteness. And Hilary has an enormous role to play in in this world of decolonizing whiteness, and she has discovered it in these last few years in her relationship with Edgar. So without further ado, I want to have you experience these two amazing people who have a very, very special relationship, which they'll get into. But let me start with introducing you to Edgar and asking him, what does it mean, Edgar, to decolonize? And how did you come to write a book on that topic? Love to know about that and your heritage and how you, as an Indigenous person, came to the world of philanthropy.
Sure. Thank you, Lynn, for having me today. Such an honor to be in conversation with my friend Hilary. Greetings, everyone. I am speaking with you today from Brooklyn, New York. This is the unceded territory of the Lenape. And I am from North Carolina, from the Lumbee tribe. The Lumbee tribe is in southeast rural North Carolina. We have about 60,000 tribal members. A lot of folks don't even know that we have Indians down south, but we still have tribes in the south. And so I'm always lifting up and trying to bring visibility to our communities there as well. And, you know, my path, a little bit about my, I guess, how I got here today is I grew up poor family, single mother. My family was, my mom who raised me was very involved in the church, and through our church was where we had lots of formal opportunities to give back and to be involved in community. Although I knew we didn't have a lot, we were always, every weekend, just involved in community activities of taking care of children in the neighborhood. And as long as, you know, I was able to, since I was able to walk, I just can remember checking on children who were just like right below me. It was kind of like a part of my responsibility. And my mom became this sort of centerpiece in our community for loving and taking care of young kids, and started this bus ministry in our church that would go out on Sundays and just pick up kids and bring them to Sunday school. And that grew to be several hundred kids at one point, that she just had a fleet of buses that just went out. And so I just grew up with a mother who had that capacity to love others. And although we had our own struggles, and part of our medicine, I think, in kind of getting through our own struggles was to just really focus on others. And so that instilled in me a sense of generosity that, you know, pretty much cemented my career to be one of service, because I just never wanted to do anything else but to be a vessel that could be used to help others, and for you know, blessings to flow through into community. As a young boy, when I was 5 years old, my mom, who and when I say my mom was a single mother, she had me when she was 15 years old, so she was a child who had a child. And but when I turned 5, we left our community and moved to the big city of Raleigh, North Carolina, because my mom wanted to ensure that I had access to the best schools possible. And she also was looking for job opportunities that did not exist, and also just to get away from a bunch of bad stuff, right? Just a fresh start. So that was that single decision that my mom made to relocate our family an hour and a half away from my community was probably the best decision that she could have ever made. It forever changed my trajectory. I was, you know, I went to great schools. I was surrounded by role models and people who had a sense of purpose. And I see now, you know, the difference between me and my cousins who didn't have that same opportunity. You know, I was the first person in my family to actually graduate from high school, and the first person to go to college and graduate from college. And I have 3 degrees from college. I think I tried to overly compensate for the past, make up for everyone. But the thing that I lost in that transition was a connection to my community. And the only Native Americans that I knew was in Raleigh was my mom. I was the only Native kid in school all throughout, you know, my formative years and throughout high school. I spent lots of summers going back home and being around cousins and you know, being in community, but I didn't have that same attachment to the culture and the land that my cousins and extended family had. And so not only did I lose that attachment, I assimilated in a lot of ways out of survival, right? And out of the messages and the dominant way of thinking that was fed to me, and things that I just internalized, right? As a young person, I was like, don't hang around those kids. You need to hang around these kids. And so I tried to align myself with whiteness because I saw their opportunity and tried to fit in with the group of folks who I felt like had privilege, as a way to escape my own pain. When you are Native American in the United States, you are inherently like always carrying around an identity complex, a sense of lost identity, right? Because of our history of colonization. And when you are an urban native like myself, a little known fact is 75 to 80% of Native Americans actually live in cities, huge population here in New York City. You know, we are detached from place. And so there's just an extra layer of otherness that we have to work through. And so in my success, I did well in school, went off to college, did well in college, and actually I worked in the nonprofit sector in some health-focused nonprofits. I got recruited to a foundation that was a health-focused foundation because I was this bright star and had done well in school, had great work experience. And I also was like, I checked a lot of boxes for diversity, right? I'm this like Native guy. And so I got hired at a really large foundation in North Carolina, and I was the youngest person who had ever been hired by this organization, and one of the youngest people in the country working at a foundation at that time, especially a person who oversaw you know, a significant portfolio of around 25 to $30 million. And so I traveled around and everyone's always like, who is this little brown kid that has the key to the treasure box? Who gave him the power, you know? And, you know, for me, when I got into that role and I got into the space of philanthropy, philanthropy is a very interesting, curious space that is super privileged, right? And super white and super legacy focused. And we know that the way that wealth has been built in the United States, there's a certain type of privilege that comes with that and an oppression for others, right? But so I was all of a sudden in this space as a Native American, and one of the few Native Americans that work in this industry. I think there's about 30 of us now, so we're still absolutely a minority. But 16 years ago, we were a small number of folks. So I was absolutely like a rare phenomenon finding myself working in this space. But, you know, I continued to sort of assimilate to what I thought was the kind of leader I needed to be in order to get resources to, you know, communities of color, poor communities, and continue to assimilate a certain type of management leadership style that was taught to me. You know, had these graduate school professors who were like, you need to dress this way and do this. And, you know, and so I wore the wingtip shoes and I wore the white dress shirts and I did all the right things. I combed my hair in the right way to try to just be the type of leader where I would be accepted and be able to accelerate in this space. And more, I just felt deeply disconnected from my purpose and who I was and my sense of identity. When I got to college, I was able to make a lot of Native friends, and it was really the first time that I knew Native people outside of my family, and and definitely outside of my Native community. In fact, I went to a national Native conference in Portland when I was a college student, and I was so confused why I didn't know that. I thought all natives looked like me. And I actually asked a professor that was chaperoning us on that trip, why are there Mexicans here? Because I thought they were that we all looked the same, and I thought that they were Mexican. So that's how isolated I was from you know, a global community of indigenous people. So long story short, you know, working in the sector of philanthropy, I found myself becoming disillusioned at some point because I tried to do the best I can to do all I could within my power to funnel resources to communities. And I just began to see that inside of the space of privilege, there was a lot of things that were not cracked up to be what they were supposed to be, right? That there was a lot of internalized like racism and a lot of just systemic racism and biases that are just baked into that system, into that space, that really prevent resources from going to communities of color. And in fact, although we were a charitable organization, I sometimes thought we were actually harming communities. And so I began to just hold all these questions, and they began to eat away at me to the point that I became like physically sick, and wondered if, you know, money was this terrible thing that I didn't need to be associated with, wondering if there was just some other way that I need to make a difference in the world. When I left my second job in philanthropy, I went to spend time with my elders, and I really had this conversation and a series of enlightened moments where I learned that my medicine is actually money, and that I am called to be a vessel that channels resources, and that money is not evil. It's actually a very neutral thing, right? It's actually people who have used money to harm others, and not money itself. And if we move money in a way that is helping to restore, helping to heal, helping to make new, then we can actually use money as a healing force. And once I accepted that medicine and that calling, my life has been forever changed. And I thought I was looking in the wrong place for all the answers. You know, I was trying to be someone that I wasn't, when all along the type of leader I needed to be was right inside of me. It was in my body. It was in my original instructions and in my ancestors. And so I've been, you know, decolonizing right along with all of y'all, right, on this journey to unlearn a lot of things and to relearn a lot of things, and to deeply connect with where I come from, and to obey the callings of my ancestors to find my way in the world. And so that's how I got here, Lynn. And in my writings and everything that I do, I just try to express that vulnerability that although I am Indigenous, I'm really no different from anyone here who was born into the place I was born, and, you know, kind of got on the program of, you know, believing and, you know, going along with the mainstream, until I kind of had an awakening that there's a different path forward that's better for me and better for all of us.
Wow, what a journey you've had. My God. Thank you, Edgar. I'm going to just say again who's speaking, because I know a lot of people thought we were starting on the hour, and we started at quarter of the hour. So I want to just say you just heard Edgar Villanueva, who's the author of a very hot, important book. I think everybody should immediately go and get it or order it and read it, called Decolonizing Wealth. Edgar is a nationally recognized expert on social justice philanthropy. And he serves as the chair of the board of directors of Native Americans in Philanthropy, and he's a board member of the Andrus Family Fund, a national foundation that works to improve outcomes for vulnerable youth. But he has served on many foundation boards, and when I first read the book, Decolonizing Wealth, right at the beginning it said that he'd given away $137 million, and he was an Indigenous man. And those two things being in the same sentence, because of my conditioning, because of all of our conditioning, was incomprehensible. I had to know the story. How could an Indigenous man have given away $137 million? Because we don't think Indigenous people are philanthropists, as you can, I'm just confessing, and I think that's probably true for all of you. And he has really taken a journey that is worthy of our love, our attention, our respect, and our commitment. So one of the people that he's taken that journey with in the last little while is our beloved, our own Hilary Giovalli, who is a Pacha person. That's my highest praise for you, Hilary. I know your other things, but that's the top of the line for me. And she's a community organizer of her community. She just was sharing with me about a big event yesterday for Indigenous Peoples Day. She's a philanthropist. She and her husband, Pete, and their whole family are very involved in philanthropy, the Giovale family. She's the author of an upcoming ethno-autobiography about her process of decolonizing and healing from whiteness. So she and Edgar have a beautiful history together. So my question to you, Hilary, is how did you find Edgar, and tell us a little bit about what you've done together, because I think it's just the most awesome story ever. So take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn and Edgar. It was wonderful to hear your story. And also greetings to everybody on the call today from all over the world. I see you coming in, so it's wonderful to be with you. And I want to just start by saying that I am sitting here on Dene, Hopi, and Havasupai land. I'm at the foot of a very powerful being, a mountain of kinship that's sacred to many nations. And, I just really want to express my gratitude because I'm a 9th generation settler. I come from Scottish, Irish, Scandinavian, and other backgrounds. And I have the privilege of living here on Indigenous land and raising my family on this land. And also, really everything that I can offer to share today is informed by this land. It's informed by the ponderosa pine forest that's all around me, and the creek that rolls down the hill, and the snow that comes up to the top of the mountain. So I'm just in deep gratitude for this land, and also for the Indigenous ancestors of this land and the current Indigenous inhabitants of this place as well, and for being in relationship with them. So I don't know if you saw Edgar, but my husband Pete came in for a minute and he had his decolonizer shirt on, and I was so happy because we didn't plan that, but he got the vibe today. So let's see. My story of connecting with Edgar is really unique. We first met about 4 years ago. We met at a conference. It was an Indigenous, an intertribal gathering, and we were on a panel together about culturally appropriate fundraising and philanthropy. And in the course of that conversation, Edgar started talking about his book that he was writing, and I was just blown away and just so excited to know that he was doing that work and it was coming into fruition. And he asked me if we could have a conversation about his book. So we did, and he interviewed me. And in the process, as the time went by and his book was getting ready, there was a moment where I was able to review, the transcript of what had been written for the interview in his book, and give my 2 cents. And the next morning, I woke up with this very strange sensation, like a dream. And I heard a message that said, you could apologize to Edgar. Now, the background of that story is that I learned about 5 years ago that some of my ancestors immigrated to this country in 1739 from Scotland and landed in North Carolina. And the first ancestor who landed in North Carolina, it was his grandson who then received a grant of stolen land. That man then immigrated down to Mississippi, and there are records that he enslaved people. So I had been working with this very traumatic and dense material for some time. And this conversation about Edgar's book and being interviewed for Edgar's book was like it opened up a little door and said, oh, there's a direct connection. You're directly connected through ancestry to someone whose family was impacted by this colonial land grab. And so, I had the good fortune to read that portion of Edgar's book about apology before it was published. And I had heard this voice in the morning saying to me, you could apologize to him. And my first reaction inside was like, oh, no. That's too much. That's overkill. You can't do that. That's dangerous. What are you thinking? That's just going to create more damage. You can't do that. But because of the pine forest here and the mountain, I was out on the land all the time, every day, going out, sitting under the trees, sitting on the land, hiking around in the snow. And bit by bit, I started to hear, this is an opportunity. And I feel like that message also came through from my ancestors, that they were asking me to pick up the task of being accountable for their history, for their legacy. That part of our family history was never discussed. I never even learned it until I was 40 years old. It was completely hidden. And so it was a big wake-up call. So I started working on this apology to Edgar, and I started writing this letter. And recently I picked up that letter again, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, this letter is really basic. There's not that much to this letter. It's really simple. But while I was writing it, I probably revised it 50 or more times. And the reason that I had to revise it so much was that there were these layers and layers of colonial conditioning that kept wanting to come through. There was the tendency to justify, erase, make it seem like it wasn't that bad, et cetera, et cetera. All of these like mechanisms of the colonized mind wanted to take over this letter. And so I just had to be really perseverant about revising and revising and revising and making sure that I could make it as clean and as honest as possible. And the thing about that ancestral apology letter is that, sometimes I hear people say, well, apology is just a waste of time, or it's just useless because it just assuages guilt, or it lets people off the hook, right? But one thing I've found by writing that apology to Edgar is that it put me on the hook. And I'm super grateful to Edgar for, having that opportunity to read his book, the portion of it before it was published, to open that invitation and that doorway to me. And then to receive it with such grace and generosity and kindness. Because that's a healing. That's a healing for the colonial trauma, the trauma of oppression that's carried in my DNA. And it's a healing for my ancestors too, to go through a process where those actions can start to be acknowledged and seen and accounted for. And I can begin taking responsibility and turning things in a different direction. And hopefully that will continue over many, many generations of turning this whole thing in a better direction. So that's the short version of this story with Edgar.
Wow, my God. And did Angus and Gemma get involved in Pete, or was it just you? How did that sit with your whole family?
I've always told them everything that I'm doing, and so they know, and they're super supportive. And I think that sometimes they think I'm a little nuts, but I just have come to realize that in 9 generations of settlers, there's an invitation has come that says, this is the generation that is going to tell the truth about what happened and is going to be accountable for what happened through this process of colonization, through the process of an entire economy that was built on slavery. And the first step in that, the very first step in that is just being honest about the fact that it happened, Yeah. So my family is super supportive, and I'm really grateful for them too. Yeah.
Wow. So inspiring, Hilary. God bless you. Thank you. So Edgar, how was that for you to have someone, and are there other people? Is Hillary a groundbreaker? I think she is. Uh, but wow, how was that for you? Say a little bit about your experience of being apologized to.
Sure, absolutely. It was life-changing on a personal level. Hillary had, I believe, sent me a text or maybe an email saying, so you're gonna get this letter from me, and there's no response required. You don't even have to read it, but just want to give you a heads up that this letter is coming. And I was like, okay. And while I'm waiting for this letter, I'm like, what in the world is in this letter? What kind of letter is this? So I'm anticipating the arrival of this letter. And when it came, when I read it, I literally just began to weep because well, for many reasons. One, I wasn't expecting an apology. I didn't think I needed one. I've never walked around feeling like anyone like owes me anything necessarily. So it was not something that I was just expecting. But what I felt in reading the letter is so seen and so heard, because what I have experienced time and time and time again is just hearing from folks the statements around, well, I just wish that Indian folks could just finish school, and if they would just do this and they would do that and they would stop drinking, or they would do and so I felt like I was always trying to help people understand, yes, at some level, there's a sense of responsibility that we all have to take, but there's something heavier at play here. There's a trauma that's in my community where people just haven't had the coping mechanisms. And I'm so fortunate that I was able to cope. And I was so fortunate that my mom snatched me out and put me in a place so that I could develop those coping mechanisms to pull myself up by the bootstraps, so to speak. But everybody is not able to do that. Everyone doesn't have that capacity because they're just under generations of oppression. And so what I have heard are all the slurs and the statements about my community that I've always had to defend. And I didn't think people really understood, the way things were. And although I'm this shining star, my family is immediately impacted by, incarceration and drug abuse and alcoholism and poverty. And, every other week I'm having to send money to someone to help with some situation. So, and again, I never went around like angry and blaming white folks. I just thought this is just the way it is. And one day my community is going to do better. So when I read this letter, I was like, oh my gosh, there's another person out in the world who actually is seeing history the way that I know it to be, and is taking some shared responsibility in this, and is really, I don't know, it takes a level of love and a level of I don't even know the word, like it's an evolved spirituality to get to a place to take responsibility for things that happened before you were born, take ownership of that, and to want to be a part of fixing that. And I think that's what it's going to take for all of us, because we all got here, by whatever means, but we've all inherited so much from a time before us, and it's up to us to fix it. And I do think that telling the truth and beginning to acknowledge the trauma that we all have, that's in Indigenous communities, that's in Black communities, and that's in white communities, acknowledging that is the only way forward. So this letter means the world to me. I have it right here. It's in this card. And I even have a photo of an altar that Hilary built as she was doing this work, the Decolonizer altar. And from this altar, I launched a t-shirt, bookmark, like Decolonizer kind of became a mantra for me. So something from this letter spiritually just I absorbed. And I was telling Lynne and Hilary recently, you guys, that this letter is kind of magical, because I literally traveled the world since 2018. It's all over talking about this, and I carried this letter with me everywhere, and I hold it on stage. And 2 times I lost the letter. One time, I think I left my book somewhere. It's my original book here. I keep the letter inside the book right at the passage on page 124. The book found its way back to me. The letter found its way back to me. A second time, I was in New York at an event. It was pouring rain. Somehow between like the taxi and the event space, dropped the letter. It fell out of my book, and someone brought it in at some point later. And I don't know how. I mean, because if you just found this randomly on the street, you would probably be like, "What is this? Like, who is this for?" Right? But the letter found its way back to me and was not wet. It's not smudged, so it's just magical to me.
Amazing.
But yeah, so it means the world to me, and it changed my life, and it really set forth a model that I think all of us can learn from at the individual level, at an institutional level. We're seeing now in, faith communities, where I'm seeing philanthropic institutions, corporations now beginning to model apologizing. And I do think it's the very first step in a process to healing.
Wow. That is so amazing. That letter story, almost as amazing as your story together. I just wanted to say that this time that we're in with the pandemic and the death of George Floyd being so publicly unlocking us in so many ways, and then the constant Black Lives Matter not letting up, and then the kind of garish and ugly election cycle we're in, all of these factors, and then having Ancestry.com and 23andMe being available, all of this at the same time, to me there's some force at work, some maybe the creator, some underlying angels that are asking us to face our truths, our past, our privilege, our whiteness, for those of us that are white, and for those who aren't, who behave consistent with whiteness, because everybody's been raised that way, just as you said, Edgar, you yourself had to sort of become white in order to be who you are now, so that you could now go back to being a little bit Indian. It's almost like this, you're such an example of what it takes to make it in our culture. So I wanted to ask you, either one of you can answer this, about reparations, because I know that's up too. Reparations, very complicated because it has to do with money. And since you're an expert in philanthropy, Edgar, when money gets involved, even though money's innocent, the way we use it is not innocent, and we dominate and manipulate with it, and it can amplify the worst in us, as well as amplify the best in us. Money is a gnarly topic for most people. So the whole idea of reparations, do you have a view of that? And either one of you can answer. Hilary, why don't you start? Do you see a future where reparations are in any way possible?
Yeah, I see a future where reparations are 100% necessary, and also I recently published an essay about reparations, and I had it reviewed by many generous friends who are people of color and Indigenous people, to make sure that I was being as honest as I could. And what I learned in the process of writing that essay was that, reparations, I feel right now, is really about trying to reduce the harm from traumatic and horrific events that will never be undone. That it will never be undone, what happened here. The way that the land was stolen, the way that the genocide of all the Indigenous people happened here, the pervasive, all-encompassing nature of the slave-based economy. We can't ever undo that. But what we can do is have a conversation about it and try to reduce the harm. So that's kind of the lens that my reparations is coming through, is trying to pay attention and really listen for what communities of color are asking for, and then being responsible to what they are asking, and doing anything I can to reduce the harm. And some of that is about money. It's about moving money in different ways and moving money to work that is led by and for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And some of it is also about actions. There's a multitude of reparative actions that all of us can take that don't involve money as well. So that's kind of where I am with it right now.
Thank you. How about you, Edgar? What do you have to say about that? You must have thought about this a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've thought about it, and I've written about it as well too. I just put an article out, I think a week or two ago. It was the anniversary of the Giving Pledge, and I said, we need less charity from folks with wealth, but we need reparations, and I'm calling for a reparations pledge. I think the word reparations does feel like a triggering word for some reason, but it is just simply, it just means repair. And as Hilary said, we can't undo, but we can try to repair. I think the fundamental question around reparations that I think we have to grapple with is when we think about money, when we think about wealth, we have to ask ourselves, whose wealth is it, right? If we feel like this is our money and it was earned, like by my family and these are my resources, then the idea of freely giving them to someone else, of course, it's going to feel like uncomfortable or not natural. But if we really can evolve our thinking to understand and believe the fact that the way that wealth was built in this country, as Hilary said earlier, was on by this stolen land and from the slave trade industry. And from there, white folks in America have had a springboard and a boost to build wealth in their communities in ways that communities of color have not. And so if we think about the money that we have access to as not being under our ownership, but it really is money and wealth that was extracted from communities, and we should be sharing ownership, then getting to an idea or conversation about reparations shouldn't be hard. The word equity is a buzzword right now, right? We all talk about equity, and a lot of people confuse it with equality. Equality means like we all get the very same thing, and equality in some ways is not a bad thing. But when we're talking about equity, if we're really going to go there with a sense of justice, equity is about ownership, right? Like how much equity do you have in your house means how much do you own versus how much the bank owns, right? And so to get to equity, we have to shift ownership of wealth and resources. And in our communities, in Indigenous communities, Black communities, we have not been in ownership of wealth. And the only way that we're going to get there is to shift ownership of wealth back into those communities from where it was originally extracted. The last thing I'll say, because I can definitely talk about this subject for a long time, is that we're not just talking about what happened for the crimes of the past, 500, 200 years ago when settlers first arrived, or for slavery. We're also talking about the layers and layers of trauma that have been caused by white supremacy and exploitation, right? We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about exclusions that were built into the New Deal that disadvantaged people of color for not by not counting certain professions worthy of benefits, such as farm workers and domestic workers. We're talking about white boarding schools that ripped Native families apart and stamped out the surviving cultures, which was just like my grandmother's generation, right? Some of our policies in the US, like the GI Bill, which really supported white folks and beginning to build wealth, were also racialized. We're talking about redlining. We're talking about elite institutions and universities that have been built by the profits of slavery, and students of color and faculty, even now at present times, feel excluded from these types of institutions. And so we're not just talking about slavery and something that happened a long time ago. We're talking about policies and practices that are still in place that continue to marginalize and hold people of color in poverty. And so we've got to do something radical, in terms of policy to change this, and do something radical with a transfer of wealth back into communities to achieve that balance.
Wow. Yeah. Holy cow, that's a big project. I remember when we first started working in South America with the indigenous people there, Bill Twist was looking at all the extractive industries way back to the time of gold and copper, and which is still going on. And if all of that wealth were returned, I mean, the numbers are astronomical. And the same thing with the United States and every single community, just astronomical, almost unconfrontable. Let me ask you also now, this pandemic experience we're having, where we are in a strange, unexpected, unprecedented kind of world that's on a kind of pause. I say kind of pause because here I am in a car in a city that I travel to, which wasn't permitted for months and months and months, but I was able to travel to see my daughter and grandchildren here in San Diego. Although it's cautious and fragile, we're moving around again. But the consumer culture, the distraction of the of an economic system that just like hammers you to want things that you don't need and pressures you to go after money above all things. The modern culture that we have, although not gone, is somewhat interrupted, is somewhat disrupted. There is an opportunity, there's a something, there's an aperture, there's an opening. And we all know, I don't think there's anybody who thinks it'll ever go back to normal. And I know we don't really, in our heart of hearts, want that. And indigenous peoples of the Amazon have said that this virus, this disruption, this pandemic is actually an ally, not a punishment for our species. It is an ally from the mother to help us stop what we couldn't stop ourselves from doing, which is destroying the very life support system on which we depend, and a lot of other things. So I want to have you make any statements or comments you'd like to make to help people while we can listen newly and differently to some of what you both are saying. As conscious as Pachamama Alliance people are, we're all caught in this crazy mindset, this dominance, this colonization. Our minds have been colonized. So while we have an opening, even as some people would say it's huge, or maybe it's slight, but it is an opening. Do you see, Hilary, you did your apology before this aperture, before the pandemic, long before it. You met before that time. You were conscious enough without the additional aid of this pause to see clearly. So now that the aperture is here, do you have recommendations for people? And I'll start with you, Hilary.
Yeah, thank you. I did put the name of 2 books in the chat relating to understanding what really happened in American history, if anyone's interested in that. But about this question that you just asked, Lynn, you know, I think that what I've learned over these years is that there was something that happened in Europe 2,000 years ago or longer that was tremendously disruptive, tremendously chaotic, tremendously traumatic. And that severing and that interruption that happened in Europe is kind of at the root of many of the dysfunctional things that we're seeing today around whiteness, white supremacy, hoarding wealth, being unable to look at what has really happened, being in denial about it. So my recommendation is for people who come from European ancestry to get to know your ancestors, the very old ancestors from before this time of interruption. Light a candle for them. You can make an altar to them. You can feed them, cook for them, make them a plate of food, and ask for their help. Because asking for the ancestors' help is very powerful right now. I think they want to help us. They want to help us resolve and pull together all these threads that are broken and the chaos that's being generated and has been generated for a long time. There's a great deal of healing that can come for us as white people when we begin to understand who our ancestors were. All of us came from earth-connected peoples. All of us came from peoples that had languages and songs and ceremonies and were connected to the land and had reciprocal relationships with the earth and knew how to be in community and knew how to take care of each other. We all come from that legacy. And it may be very far back for some of us, but we can still get in touch with that today. And that has been a very powerful practice for me. And honestly, I think that being in relationship with my ancestors is what has given me the strength to apologize and make reparations. Because to apologize and to begin making reparations is to upset and overturn an entire worldview that I was acculturated into, that many of us were acculturated into, that says that we're innocent and that this has nothing to do with us, you know? And it takes a lot of grounding and a lot of spiritual assistance to be able to aerate and redo that narrative into a different understanding. So I will mention that there's an ancestral memory circle that I am going to be co-facilitating beginning in November. It's through an organization called, it's Organization of Nature Evolutionaries. And that's going to be my first experience facilitating this for other people. But I believe strongly that there's a lot of potential in that. So that's what I'm going to start trying to do next.
And you put that in the chat, can you?
I can do that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. Edgar, what do you have to say about the opening that is here, or that may be here? I hope it is. I feel it is.
I do feel an openness, and you know, and a call to stillness, a call to reflection. For me, what I am experiencing in this moment is, you know, through this triple pandemic, really, of COVID, and then the resulting economic fallout, and then also with this movement for Black lives, all of these things are intertwined and connected. And I think that in the US, we have felt a collective exhaustion, a collective heartbreak. You know, I think for the first time, what a lot of folks in the Black community have felt, you know, the mantra of the movement for Black lives is "we are done dying." I think that we're all feeling that way. Like, we are done dying. We're done seeing you know, our country being on this trajectory that is not good for any of us. And I think in that our common humanity is kind of coming to the surface in that, because regardless of who you are, we've all been impacted for the first time by something in a long time. And so this radical solidarity is really something that I feel is rising from the ashes, you know, this beautiful thing. And it's creating an opportunity for us to model a different type of leadership and to lean in into our humanity. And what Hilary offered is something that I say all the time, is that, you know, I'm no different from you all, and needing to go back to those original instructions and to remember and to listen. And, you know, and to act now, right, with whatever resources you may have to be able to contribute to supporting these movements that are on the front lines of really pushing for system change. This is a moment to be able to respond to that. And, you know, this is unprecedented in my lifetime of seeing beyond, you know, being a cheesy Hallmark commercial here. I do think that there is a solidarity. This movement for racial justice is so multiracial in a way that I didn't see that even 3 years ago, where I see Indigenous folks with Black folks with white folks locked arms here in New York City and all over the place, really demanding for transformative systemic change, because our very lives on this planet rely on that. So that's the beautiful thing that I'm feeling here, is just a deeper connection to all of my relatives, including you all on this call. But what's going to get us through to, you know, to the next place we're supposed to be is tapping into the spirit and really listening and allowing that to guide us.
Thank you, Edgar. I want to just say that there's a wonderful prophecy from South America that is called the Eagle and the Condor prophecy that really talks about the modern world people and indigenous people coming together at this time in history and remembering they are each other and flying together in the same sky, wing to wing, so that the world can come into balance. And that prophecy has much more chapters to it. It talks about a huge climactic change from one era to another that will take place where the earth will humble all her creatures so they remember their rightful role in relationship to her. It's a prophecy about climate change, about volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, fires, all of that we're experiencing now, superstorms, that indigenous people knew would come because we all need to be humbled, all of us, in relationship to the natural world, in relationship to the mother, in relationship to each other. So in many ways, when I have that context, or when we hear that context, the trials and tribulations, the suffering, the COVID deaths, the enormous uprising for Black Lives Matter, the meltdown of our democracy, the everything. You can see that it is possible that it's all dissolving, because it wants to be completely and totally reborn. But in order to do that, this apology and reparations and ownership and responsibility to me seems like a very, very, very key step. And without it, we just, rise out of the ashes and do it all over again. So I just wanted to thank you both for what you've said, and see if you have any final comments, things that we should do, ways we can stay involved with you. I know, Edgar, you need to get off in time for your next speaking engagement. And I think you have about 7 or 8 more minutes. So I want to give you the first chance at telling us anything that we should be connecting to. Thank you.
Absolutely. I popped a few resources in the chat box. You mentioned the Condor and the Eagle, Lynne. There's a beautiful documentary that has just been made that is lifting up Indigenous organizing in Canada, the US, and around the Amazon, and really, speaking to the need to protect Mother Earth and sort of the confluence of these different Indigenous cultures coming together. Absolutely beautiful. A screening is happening on Sunday, and I would love to invite you all to that if you're interested. The website I sent is at Lush Cosmetics, which might be a weird website, but they are a investor in this film. They do a lot of fantastic support of Indigenous groups. So just wanted to share that resource and opportunity. The other is with my organization, Decolonizing Wealth Project. We have a circle of giving and healing called Liberated Capital, and I'll put a link there, where we just invite folks to come together for collective giving and collective healing. And we'll be having some programming. It's a brand new effort that started it's been a year. It's been almost a year now. Time has flown by. I keep saying like last September, like that was yesterday, but we are supporting Indigenous communities across the U.S. through our collective giving. And so, and then we create space for opportunities like this to have conversations around how we can all come together and heal each other. So I invite you to come and heal with me there.
Thank you, Edgar. Wonderful. Hilary?
Thank you, Edgar. I know you need to go soon, so I just want to appreciate you for all your work in the world, and you have taught me so much. And I want to say too that when I read Edgar's book, the whole thing in its entirety, I was so uncomfortable. And that's good. That's a good thing. So please read his book and allow yourself to be uncomfortable, because that discomfort is the fertile ground for the change that we need. And it's okay. It won't hurt you. It won't kill you. It'll just help you grow. And I also wanted to address, somebody wrote me a private chat message and asked me if I could talk about what happened in Europe beginning 2,000 years ago. And I wanted to just address that, because those of us who come from European lineages, this is very, very important, because this is a part of our history also that we don't know, many of us. And, you know, I'm just learning about my ancestors in Ireland and Scotland and how they were, you know, besieged by the Roman Empire beginning in, I believe, the year 43, something like that. And, you know, as the Roman Empire expanded, they were all about taking other cultures and destroying them and assimilating them, ripping away the language, ripping away the customs, relocating people and drafting and forcing people to enlist in the Roman army to expand the empire. It continued with the Inquisition and people being tortured for their folk religious practices, their spiritual beliefs, their connection to the land, for different spiritual and religious practices. It continued on with the burning times, where mostly women, but also some men and children, were tortured, unbelievably brutal torture for hundreds of years, as you know, that patriarchal, fear-based religious establishment spread all throughout Europe. And you know, these things are not by any means an excuse for what's happened with colonization and the creation of white supremacy, but they are part of our history as people of European descent. And I think that for me, it's been really healing to start to learn those things, to feel into them, to have dreams about them, to even right now, I'm starting to learn how to sing in Gaelic, because that's a part of reclaiming my Scots Highlander heritage, my true identity, because that was all stripped and shamed and prohibited. The English language was foisted upon European people of many, many different cultural identities and tribes. The English language is not, it's not native to anyone. It's an amalgamation. So, you know, there are just a lot of things like that that I think can be really a source of strength and healing for people of European descent. And I would just share that because somebody asked that question. Thank you.
Hilary, thank you so much. Wow. Well, Edgar, I think, has probably departed and gone to do another talk. But I'll just say, Edgar, if you can still hear us, thank you so, so, so much for your brilliant, brave, incredible life, and your brilliant, brave, incredible work. And thank God for your mother, your 15-year-old mother, who raised you in a way that you both have your Indigenous heritage and you understand whiteness so deeply that you are, you're the kind of human being you are, with your 3 degrees and the first person to graduate from high school and college in your tribe. I mean, from your family. I'm sorry, your family. And thank you for your generous time with us today. It just really is very moving. And Hilary, thank you for the example you set, and your courageous apology, and lighting the torch for all of us to look backwards in a way that we own, without feeling ashamed, but more to liberate ourselves from the histories that we've gone unconscious to and are numb to, and that are unacknowledged in any history books, except for a few good ones, which I'm sure you gave us, and also for being such a light in this world. Thank you. Sorry. I'm just so moved by you. Thank you. Okay, everybody, pull it together here. So, thank you, both of you. Let me say a few things about, what's next here. So I want to remind you all that the Pachamama Alliance every fall comes together, the whole community, We've been doing it for many years. It's something called the luncheon, and we're not going to do the luncheon this year because of COVID, either in New York or in San Francisco, but we are going to gather. And in fact, we can gather like we're doing now, way more of us from every single country on earth, where Pachamama has educational programs in 88 countries on November 19th. And if you're in Australia or Japan or India, it might be a different day, but it's on November 19th in San Francisco, California time, Pacific time, from noon to 1:15. And it will be the biggest, hopefully, Pacha person gathering ever, with as many guests as you can bring, thousands and thousands and thousands. There's room for thousands of people. There's no limit. And we have Jane Goodall coming to be with us. We have Van Jones coming to be with us. It will be 75 minutes long. It will be right around this time of day. So if you're in another country, it'll translate to this right around now is when it will end. Start at our noon in San Francisco Pacific time and end at 1:15 Pacific time. And it will be a gathering like no other. We've never actually had the opportunity like we do now that we're all trained on Zoom, to gather the whole Pachamama clan and to have you bring everybody that you would want to join us. And there will be, of course, because we always do when we can, we'll have a fundraising invitation for people to contribute. And it's way more than that. If people come and they don't contribute, that's fine. And if they come and they contribute, that's really fine. But it's not about that so much as the luncheon is. Usually it's about us getting together. Us getting together after the election in the United States, which will be, by the time we get there on November 19th, we'll probably be exhausted from a certain kind of messaging that's not exactly positive. And after the election, there may be, a contention of some kind. So you want to bring everybody you know and yourself to the land of possibility, resilience and possibility, and that's Pachamama Alliance. We promise to uplift you, to inspire you, to immerse you in the power and possibility of what it means to be human, and the aperture, the opening that all of this is, that seems like a breakdown, that's clearly the seeds of a breakthrough. And so we're very grateful to have you here today and to have been part of this really awesome conversation. And the next Resilience and Possibility in These Times event is, do you know, Josh? I don't have that in my notes here. Josh, will you tell us? Is there something scheduled?
Determined. Everyone will hear from us when we have that finalized.
Okay, great. Okay, we will let you know. So watch for your messages from Pachamama Alliance. And then finally, thank you for being here. And get the book, Decolonizing Wealth. You'll read all about that journey that Edgar has been on, but also what you can do. And go back to that chat and look up all those things. And I recommend doing everything. That's what I'm going to do. And once again, thank you for being on this call, for opening your heart, your soul, your history, your legacy, your heritage to each other. And so that we can build a future on the backs of our heart, rather than on the backs of other people, rather than the backs of stolen land. We can create a future that comes from our heart. So thank you, everybody. Bye.